For those of you watching online, welcome. And for those of you who are in the temple in the flesh, welcome. An absolute pleasure to have you here and with us. We are slightly lesser numbers than normal, and we have equinox on, which I wasn't aware of. Nonetheless, the important people are here. Am I right? Not one of you agrees with me. The important people are here. Thank you. So this evening I have, we're speaking about the aesthetics of joy, and I have the delight of introducing two friends of mine. Having said that, I'll do that very shortly. For those of you who are joining us online, just to let you know that we are, again, collecting in the space. I was having a conversation with Charmaine, one of our previous keynote speakers, who's renovation queen, does the renovation physically herself, and we were laughing, and I said to her that I'm an outgoing introvert, in that I love people, but I'm also happy to have my space, and COVID has probably taught us that I actually miss people that I don't particularly like. Anybody else in that boat? So it's absolutely lovely to see, I like you all, sorry, I apologise, I like all of you that are attending. So it's lovely to have you with us, to let you know that Caroma is open. We're doing live streamed events and in-house events, and if you'd like a consultation or any specifications or assistance, you can do that either in-house or you can do that from a remote location. We'll pop you in an email tomorrow with a link, and you can log in and book an appointment with one of our fabulous designers. This evening we have Matilda with us. Matilda, give us a wave. We have Grace, BDM. We have Vanessa is at the back. We have Alex, who's catering, and we have Jack, who's with us at the front door. Jack, give us a wave. Absolute pleasure. So if you need any assistance this evening with any specifications or any inquiries, or you'd like a tour, we're more than happy to do that with and for you. Next week, actually the week after next, we have Darren Palmer coming to do renovation. So Darren is currently one of the judges off the block, and he's doing all of his tips and tricks. He's got 2 pods that he has designed with us, with the colour series on the far side. If you'd like to see those, we're happy to show you. And Darren's talking about some of the innovative tips and tricks that are in the marketplace currently. Love to see you at that. Coming up, we also have a small sustainability expo. That's another event that we'd love to see you at, talking all things biophilia, biomimicry, and organic designs. And this evening, having said that, we have 2 gentlemen who also are green warriors in the marketplace, architecturally and interior design. One has come down from the fabulous Noosa, and the other one's come from the fabulous Sydney. He also has some gentlemen with him from Noosa. We have a very dear friend of Adrian's with us, and 2 of his co-workers in the temple this evening. Can I have a little wave and shout out for the boys, please? Thank you. They asked me to say that. So, that was supposed to be funny and nobody laughed. Okay, Callie. Callie Vandermeer. Actually, they've both been very, very dear friends. And Bernadette Jansen is on her way in. Bernadette, come on in now that you've had a welcome. Bernadette has a school, which is the School of Renovating, and fundamentally Bernadette teaches women how to retire into renovation. So if you are looking to give up your day job and make a living from renovating, Bernadette is your renovation queen. Absolute pleasure to have you in the Caroma Temple this evening. 2 gentlemen that I consider to be very dear friends are with us this evening, commencing firstly with Callie Vandermeer. Callie is the founder of Design Partnership with offices in Sydney, Joburg and Cape Town. He's a trained architect, but his interest, passion and knowledge lies within predictive human behaviour and the application thereof to interior design in order to maximise the human connection to space. Also, we have Adrian Ramsey, designer and director, Adrian Ramsey Design House, multi-award-winning design studio, designer of new homes and renovations, specialising home acreage or large block properties. Member of global group architects designers known as Whisperers, and his specialty being a land whisperer. I'm fascinated by that, so that'll be an interesting one to find out about tonight. Presenter and speaker on global design trends, innovation design, systematic innovation also. He also takes tours to Texas. What goes on the road stays on the road, I'm told. So if you'd like to look at booking a tour to Texas when we're back and flying, we're looking at the work of Frank Lloyd Wright, mid-century modern architecture of Palm Springs and modern architecture of Austin, Texas. So he's also very high energy. So he's a great person to be on a tour with. He's the host of design podcast Talk Design, where we have 40,000 followers, must watch, and where he chats with creatives known and lesser known about their passion for better design and lives. This evening we're talking about the aesthetics of joy, something we all need, particularly in the slightly post-COVID season. So please make welcome Adrian Ramsey and Callie Vandermeer.
So I'm going first. Adrian, as you listen to that introduction, there's a lot going on there, and I think if I went second, there would be no chance to talk. So we've instinctively known for centuries that our built environment has a profound impact on our sense of self and well-being, and we've tried for as long to distill this in a set of codes or bottle this into something that we can potentially carry on reusing and get the built environment to its most effective state. So you think about it, the Greeks had the three main orders. They also had 1.618, the golden mean, or the golden section, as a way to guide proportion and ensure that the proportions were always correct. Look at the Parthenon and those buildings. And there are many theories around this, but for the sake of this talk, we'll just mention it briefly. The ancient Chinese had a feng shui geomancy as a means to harmonize individuals with their environment. And of course, the Egyptians had color healing temples with sunlight pass through crystals and gemstones as a means for color healing. So conceptually and believed by many, if we strip out detail around specific decor, potentially there's a good argument to be had for the fact that proportion, space, and light is fundamentally universal. Because for more than 99% of our evolution, we've lived so close to the earth, to its breathing, to its ebb and flow, that these principles are, in truth, really instilled within us all. So when we use the word beautiful, often as designers, one tends to underuse that word because it's subjective. But when clients use the word beautiful, and we don't give it enough credit, therefore, so when clients use the word beautiful, what they're often saying is that they like the vision of life that something represents when they look at it. And Alain de Botton wrote a beautiful book, The Architecture of Happiness, in which he supports his theories. So it's not just a kind of aesthetic word, it's a kind of word that clients often use to represent kind of the way that they want to live. And it's supported by Bill Browning. You may have heard of him. He's written a fabulous book, The Nature Inside, a Biophilic Design Guide. And he focused specifically on interior space and specifically in retail, hospitality, residential, and workplace. And he's written, and I'm going to touch on things lightly tonight because there's just so little time to get through everything. But it then breaks it all down into those specific rules. And there are some universal rules that really bring joy. Maybe worthwhile having a look at that book. So the beauty that we speak about in architectural space naturally has a great part to influence not only our mood, but our emotional and physical health. Because that's an environment we can control, unlike the other one called nature. And it's in this desire for control that we've often also turned our back on the impact or the influence of nature to our own detriment. And you only need to look at hospitals to see the impact of that, quite stripped of color and void of any detail, as antiseptic in their aesthetic as they are in their hygiene. They really don't help to they really don't assist in the healing process. And this is quite kind of sad because there's a lot of documentation around it. So as early as 1860, the celebrated nurse Florence Nightingale observed the way that color, flowers, light, objects, and the richness of those impact the health of her patients. And she wrote all of this down in her notes on nursing and said that the effect in sickness of beautiful objects, a variety of objects, specifically brilliancy of colors, is hardly to be appreciated. People say the effects only on the mind. It's no such thing. The effects on the body too. Variety of form and brilliance of color in the objects presented to patients are an actual means of recovery. And there are many other studies, and you would know this one by Roger Ulrich when he did a study on the the speed at which people healed after gallbladder operations. And those that faced nature in some way, that could see nature, a tree or grass or whatever they could see, versus those that faced a brick wall, the stay in the hospitals were markedly shorter. So he kind of qualified the theory that the qualities of our surroundings have a real impact on our physical, spiritual, and emotional health. And it's to this end that the growing body of evidence, and people started exploring, like artists are. There's a beautiful saying that artists question a problem and designers answer those. Marek Myerscough did a beautiful children's wing in the hospital, in the Sheffield Children's Hospital, where she brought in a tremendous amount of color and really played around with that quite effectively. And her theory was really that children are brave in color. Children look at the way they use crayons and the way that they dress, and they're really not scared of colors. They live in colorful worlds. And this kind of gets phased out of into our adulthood. And that the color should be brought into hospitals to make them more at home with their space. And she played on that in this ambulance example as well. And there's a theory, it's called the distraction theory, that if these objects out of place, if you enter an ambulance and you suddenly see these colorful things in an ambulance, you'd be a little bit distracted from your injury and from the problems that you have. So just ways to bring joy. And so we know now quite specifically the impact of our surroundings on us. We know it exactly because of things like neuroimaging. We know the neurological response to color, light, sound, proportion, and smell, and how that influences us. We can read it through our body movement, activity, temperature, the brain function, and so forth. And to this end, there's a fantastic exhibition or installation, really, in the spring of 2019, when Google partnered with the Arts and Mind Lab in Milan during the Milan Design Week. And they did an exhibition or a room or set of rooms called A Space for Being. And there were 3 distinctly different rooms. Some more natural, some less natural, woods, some none of that. Beautiful lights, harsh light, not so harsh, some with string music, some piano music. And upon entering, you put on a color band with various colors as well, according to whatever you wanted to take. And these would measure your kind of biorhythms. And people were asked just to keep quiet for 5 minutes, put away their cell phones, and just walk through the space. And they measured their function. And by the end, they got these personalized data visualization charts for them to see how they responded to these specific environments. And it was a fantastic experiment, and the result really quite different for different people. And I'll get to something a bit later when you start looking at spaces for multiple or a lot of people. The approach is a little bit different. But Sushi Reddy, the architect, is an architect behind this, really then said that her departure point is form follows feeling, something that we have avoided for a long time. So it seems like we've gone on and off with that kind of approach. And that's obviously a massive departure from form follows function that kind of dominated the built environment for a very long time. In density packed cities, needed quick buildings to go up to accommodate the growing urban population. And so our specific approach, which I will talk to you about now, is in hospitality. So I'm an architect and my colleagues are as well. But we found the space of hospitality fascinating because we could explore these thoughts around human behavior quite effectively and experiment through 30 years to try and see what worked and what didn't work. And believe me, we made a lot of mistakes. But there's the 5 senses, of course, that we need to be quite mindful of. And you all know about that, and I'm going to touch on that very briefly. And then there are 8 rules that we apply when we say that we need to create spaces for this kind of joy and to consistent quality and we measure it by 2 things only, really, and that's dwell time and footfall. So if we can get more people to visit the space and stay longer, it means that their response to it is positive. So we've always really approached this kind of design thinking as framing for these behaviors. So this is something we just completed. I'm not going to talk about our work tonight, and we'll do another talk about that at some point. And I just put the slide up here because there's stuff that I'm going to reference to, like storytelling, the use of color, and so forth. And this particular restaurant, just by example, it's done for a client that gives us a tremendous amount of work, Bradley Michael. And the result of this design was they have a chain of these restaurants called the Meat and Wine, but they're open for 5 days a week. But this is so successful that they're open for 7 days a week because of that demand. So we've managed to get a lot of things right in this one, and now the pressure's on for this client to get them right every single time. And of course, that is something to live up to. So the 5 guiding senses, again, I'm just going to touch very briefly because you're all aware of this, and sight being the first one, and that's the most prominent one. It's by which we gather information. Color is the most powerful tool, of course, to impact the behavior. And specifically in our place, our space that we operate in, where we look at kind of really creating joy. I'm going to touch on 3 quickly: red, orange, and yellow. And red's really that kind of reptilian carryover of densely rich, sugar-packed fruits. It is said that, and we often argue the point, and that's a conversation for another day, that it's believed that the faster the food, the more the red in the space should be. Yes and no. We'll unpack that another day. Orange is a color that gives us kind of sense of calm and comfort and warmth. So we use a lot of that, or variants of that, like autumny colors. And then yellow, in anticipation of the food coming, serotonin. So those are all colors that work quite well in our specific space. I'm not going to discuss the rest, green, blue, and all those. And then we have lighting. Circadian lighting is important, that lives and drives according to the biorhythms. And specifically, we are aggressive in our insistence that lights in front of house in hospitality should never be more than 2,700 kelvins. It's a very warm light, and the light used, and it's so subtle, and we'll talk about invisible design a fraction later, that you don't actually notice it. So it's important because the light bounces off tables, it reflects into your face as opposed to highlighting it. And then within that, you appear more attractive, you look better, and people around you look better, and so forth. When you look better, you feel better, and the conversation is just a whole different kind of conversation. People tend to stay longer. So it really impacts our mood. The Lombard effect, this is something according to, I put this in here because it really addresses sound. Sound in restaurants are important. So besides music, people fret too much about the music. It's really something that sits in the background. Acoustics are critical, and we tend to get that, or one struggles to get that exactly right, but it needs to be exactly right. Because a restaurant space, for people to have joy in a restaurant space, they go there to socialize. They don't go there to eat. Despite what you may say, people don't go to a restaurant to eat. In fact, studies are done that you don't remember food. You remember food, but you don't remember taste. You remember the total experience. And because of that, you think that the food that you had was great, but you don't remember the taste. And so the acoustics, the Lombard effect is when the acoustics are not balanced and people start talking louder to hear each other, and that creates a repetition of everybody talking louder, and in the end, it's just a noise. And so that's the second biggest complaint after service. In a restaurant, what you want to do is have it just enough so you can hear now and then a little word from somebody else, but not the total sentence. Because we want to socialize. We go there to socialize. So it's to overhear a little bit, but not entirely. So getting that balance is critical. And then touching on smell. So there's a fragrance wheel. So the 5 senses through thousands of years. So we've had smell at some point was was a lot better developed, and we've kind of tended to kind of lose a bit of that through time. So it's really the olfactory neurons, they pick it up through the olfactory bulb, and then the limbic system, and smell is the most powerful way to trigger a memory. And if the memory and a smell is great, we just assimilate to the space a whole lot better. So apart from the theatre, you see open kitchens, and apart from the theatre that this creates, it's a way for the smell to travel through the space. And if you can't succeed in having the smell travel through the space, you have to pump it in. You have to use scents of kinds in the darker, deeper places. Because the right kind of smell can increase turnover by up to 300%. Now that's massive. Of course, and dwell time by 16%. So 16% in dwell time, the longer, and that's true for banks, and that's true for any retail, really. The longer you stay, the more you buy, and banks sell products too. And touch, this is not thought about often enough, but it has a subconscious effect. So, and that's important in our specific areas, right from the front door, when you open a door, when the door's closed. And you don't touch anything further until you sit down. But then it's the weight of the chair, it's the texture of that chair, it's the texture of the table, it's the weight of the menu and the texture of the menu and the cutlery and the crockery. All of that's critical. So COVID-19 is another story, and I'm sure many people have spoken about that. So we're saying that we need to move away from touch in restaurants, that they are important, and those areas will obviously always touch. And it is so, there was a fantastic study done by a guy, Filippo Marinetti, and he encouraged patrons to wear pajamas, and those pajamas to be covered in either sandpaper or cork or felt and all kinds of interesting materials, and to eat with their hands so they could really experience touch. And if anybody can guess when this was, Adrian's going to hand a bottle of, I don't know what that is, champers or when just guess a time. Adrian, guys, you're not allowed to, Rob, no, don't speak up. Anybody, just give a date. Who said that? He says you're 7 years out. That's close enough. You can have it.
I think he was already born that night.
That's phenomenal, and that's great that you got that. I mean, you'd think that was recent.
So was it 7 years earlier or 7 years
later, 1909, yeah. Sorry, 6. And taste, now, that's not something we can control. That's a passport factor. If your client can't produce great food, they shouldn't be in the restaurant game. But we've placed this at number 5 because it is the least important. When I say the least important, people are over kind of emphasizes and over it. The factor of importance is not that high. Food needs to be good always and not great sometimes, because great means at some point it's going to be not so great and you will pick it up and be disappointed. So if you want to have a continuous joyful experience in a restaurant, it's important for the restaurateur, and that's why I have a specific, and we have a specific problem when people chase hats and so forth, because it places too much emphasis on the food. And many people will disagree, but if you can do good food always and have a great environment that you can control, it's a completely controllable environment, people will always have a great experience. So these are our 8 guiding principles. And how am I doing for time?
Yeah, fine.
I'm good?
Yeah. So
the first one is belonging to a tribe. So we have this hard, and I say a tribe because it's more instinctive, and it gets to the essence of it better. We have this need to belong to a community or family. And this is, again, a function that's hardwired within us, because for 99%, again, of our evolution, we needed to be in groups to survive, to procreate, to thrive even. And so this is, in mammals, all mammals need to be in groups, and humans, of course, no different. So successful restaurants are places that understand this and welcome you within that as part of the family. A great restaurateur will make a point of knowing people's names, and now with technology, there's no need not to, there's no excuse not to know a person's name coming into a restaurant. And if they hear it the first time, to repeat it. So great restaurants that understand this are incredible for social interaction because they're social spaces. So restaurants are often just busy because they are busy, because there are people, and the more people say busy because they're busy. So that's an interesting concept. Personality. So think about restaurants in the same way that you think about a person. You tend to describe somebody that you like as somebody that's attentive, friendly, or charismatic, sometimes funny. You're drawn to their character. Whatever that attraction, though, those are largely, they fall into two areas. They're those people that you admire and those that you deeply care about. And you want to be in the deeply care about section, because if you're in the deeply care about section, it means that you'll forgive that place many mistakes. It's like a friend. Somebody you admire not, somebody you care about, you will. And there's a ratio, and from memory I think it's 21-1. For every 21 things you do correctly, one mistake will erase the 21 things you did right. So it's very important to get into that kind of care section in terms of the personality. And then visual appeal. We all know that beautiful people get half the credibility because of the visual appeal. It's just how we're hardwired again. And it's again how we've navigated ourselves for thousands of years because of this visual stimuli. And if you think about this, 30% of our cortex is devoted to visual stimuli, and we process information in 16 milliseconds. And 65% of us are visual learners. So therefore, if a place looks good, it is good. That's how we think about it. And I just found this interesting little graph that's got nothing to do with this. But it spoke about what women find attractive in men. And the first one that you see at the top of the long line is broad shoulders, and then biceps, and so it goes down. And I went through the first 5, and I realized I had none of those. And then the thing we call invisible design. Now, these are the things that happen subtly in the background. These are things that we don't know about. But the best designs are often invisible. Things like this, and I mean, we can have a talk just about invisible design, but I'm going to mention a few just quickly. So in our space that we function, it's critical to intuitively understand where the toilets are. For example, because that's the only thing you do when you come to a restaurant. You come in, you sit at your table, and if you do get up, you go to the toilet. That's the only place you go to. You don't go to the kitchen, you don't go anywhere else, you go to, that's where you go. And so they need to be intuitively positioned, because it creates angst, just the idea of asking. It creates discomfort. And it stops the restaurant from functioning every time you have to ask somebody. And signage, in truth, is a failure of design. If you can't get the design to work intuitively like that, you failed in the execution of the space. And then there's obviously a million other little things, like the height of a chair, the height of a table, 450 or 460 and 750. All those things need to be exact. If they're out, you know it. And you feel uncomfortable, but you can't place why. And interestingly, a side note, banks, and these are things, again, that you don't really find in any book, but we've done many banks, and we found that, so a chair, the lower the chair, the longer the visit. So you have bar chairs that fulfill a different function, and I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the kind of space where we sit back for a while. So restaurant chairs, of course, the height needs to be exactly that. And if you sit in a couch, it needs to be lower at 400. But in a bank, because of the nature of banking now and the fact that banks are mainly online, the profile of people that go there are much older. And you want to, the visit is short. It's 5 minutes, it's 10 minutes, but you need to sit down. So that chair height needs to be at 500, 550 even. And the person visiting will not feel it or understand it, but it'll make the total visit more pleasurable, more enjoyable, without them really understanding why that happened. And it'll make everything else seem more enjoyable if you kind of take this thinking through the entire development of the space. So, having said that, rules are also meant to be broken, and if this is really applicable. I'll mention one or two things here. Storytelling. If you're great at storytelling, people like you. The same for a restaurant. Restaurants must be able to tell great stories, and that's again really hardwired within us. It's the way we transferred history from father to son, generation to generation before we could write. And so storytelling is gestures. It's much more than reading a story. And restaurants should have a story. Each restaurant space should have, each hospitality space should have a story. This place has a story. So I've got this one example here. It's something we did in the Campbell store. It's Six Head. It's called Six Head, and the name may be confusing or have no meaning until you hear the story. And the story behind this is the first head of cattle that came on the first fleet. There were 6 of them that came and survived through the Cape of Good Hope. And upon arrival here, were kept in a secure space for a couple of weeks and then disappeared through one lunchtime. And you guys may know the story as well, but then found 10 years later in what was called the green pastures, and they'd grown to 100 cattle. Some articles differ, say it was 90, some 100. And that saved the colony from starvation. But that's a very beautiful story for a place like a meat restaurant like this. And we go quite specific on the left, and often designers don't want to do that, but when you tell a story, you need to be often quite direct. So on the right-hand side, we have the heads, and often restaurants have specific, but nobody wants to think of the animal, and that's the thing with restaurant space. Nobody wants to think about it. So we had Dion Horstman commissioned to do those beautiful sculpture heads on the right-hand side there in brass wire, the 6-head cattle. And on the left-hand side, we commissioned a copy of the Sirius in a 1:17 scale, was it? And then a story that we told very briefly, just so people understand where the name comes from. And then because we found as we developed the space that we couldn't do anything to the walls because of their sensitivity. They were quite brittle. We created this curtain of knots, and there's 1,500 of those knots, as a nod to the 1,500 souls in the first fleet. But anyway, I'm mentioning that because people that enter, they understand the story, they ask about it, they can read the story, and they can retell the story, and so the place becomes a lot more interesting once you've been there. When you describe the place, you're not describing the food as such. And then this concept called mirror neurons, and that is really our source of empathy. And they fire when we perform an action and watch somebody else perform the same action. It's also a source of learning, so how we copy through imitation. And so when we eat in a restaurant where our actions are similar to others, it's important to note it makes us feel comfortable in this space. And our actions, by and large, are the same, the way we eat. If somebody's suddenly going to come in and start eating with their hands, of course, it'll cause chaos. But so we see the way people push in chairs, and we find comfort in the fact that we understand the behavior. So open sight lines are part of the issue. They're part of the things you need to consider. And then a concept we call the remembered present. That's something that was coined by Gerald Edelman, and it describes this notion that we think that we are responding consciously to our environment when in fact our brain is processing thousands of bits of information about our history, things we have experienced, and projects it milliseconds forward to tell us how to move forward in this space. Otherwise, we wouldn't know. And it needs to be similar, not the same. So a loud bang would be a door, and if you're in a space that's always windy, it wouldn't startle you. But if you're not, it would. Or in somebody else's mind, it may be a gunshot or whatever. So it is critical that with what you do in this theory of remembered presence, that you put enough similarity in a space, and so places that are too different from what you know cause a lot of friction and anxiety. So we call that difference the 3% difference. So it's just left of center, because if it's too much, people they don't understand it. And then something we call social reality. Social reality creates physical reality. If enough people get together to weave a story into, or abstract concepts into reality, they become reality. We just need enough people to do it. And that's true for anything. It's true for your name, it's true for mine, it's true for everything. It's true for something that's on a lot of people's mind, because it's a weird concept, cryptocurrencies. It's just enough people coming together to believe in it. There's no substance for it, really. Or voting for a leader by putting enough crosses. Enough people putting enough crosses. Or somebody saying that an election was stolen, and enough people believing it to storm a capital. That's social reality. And if you apply the same thinking in restaurant design, if enough people stand in a queue, and there's two restaurants next to each other, the one with the queue is the one where you're going to go. You're not going to go to the empty one, because enough people have told you that this one with the queue is the right one to go to. So you'd rather wait a while. If enough people say you need to book months in advance, you will book months in advance, because that's the social reality created. Oops, sorry guys. So it's having said all these things about census and rules, there's a blend between all of these things. There's the rules that you apply and can follow, and then there's finding the kind of X factor between it. If you just apply everything according to rules or sets of rules, you'll create blank spaces. You'll create things that nobody wants to go to. So somewhere within that, you have to break it. It's a little bit, so I'm going to tell you a little story. A client of mine, one of his favorite stories about this Greek restaurant that he enjoys going to. And the restaurant's quite bland. In fact, there's almost nothing in it. But what it has the mother and it has the daughter that runs the place. So there's that kind of authenticity. And when you sit down, you suddenly find that you're sitting way too low. There's something wrong, you're uncomfortable. The chair's too low, the table's too low, and you're uncomfortable, and why haven't they thought of this properly? But then it's so uncomfortable that you beg the question, why is this so low? Why are we so uncomfortable? And the mother or daughter will tell you that my father had passed away, but he was very short. And because he was very short, my mother always wanted to make him feel comfortable in the home, and she always cut down the tables and the chairs. Whether that's true or not doesn't matter, but you go there because the story is so compelling. And so this saying as well, that it is not all about the use. And you might have read it, but I'll read it just anyway. If usability engineers designed a nightclub, it would be clean, quiet, brightly lit, with lots of places to sit down, plenty of bartenders, menus written in 18-point sans serif, and easy-to-find bathrooms, but nobody would be there. They would all be down the street at Coyote Ugly, pouring beer on each other. And that is true for design. There's the things that we can predict, there's the things that we know, there's the things that we can apply for, but then there's this just little thing that you need to take a bit of a leap into the unknown to really find that point of joy. Thank you.
Yes, man.
Thank you. I'll sit downstairs.
That was great. You're going to sit downstairs? Keep away. Callie. Well, thank you. And thanks, Deb and Caroma and Callie, for that was really fascinating. I mean, who else learnt something there? I certainly did, yeah. There's always something. Every time I talk to Callie, I seem to learn something that I go, how do I remember that and put it into practice? The one I got that was key tonight for me was 21 good things erase the bad thing. And clearly at home, I'm going to have to up the 21. I think I'm probably running at about 12, so I'm not getting clear space to get ahead. I'm sure my wife will correct me on that or tell me now that I'm still how many more things I've got to do to get ahead. Thanks, Callie. I'm sure she's listening. I don't need to tell you who I am. Deb already told you, so I'm done on that slide. With this, there was only one point there that was something different, which was land whispering. And land whispering is a discipline or an art that a group of us, when I say, I'll go whispering first, a group of friends of mine who are architects and designers around the globe have formed a group of us where we're sharing the disciplines of how we discover different urban environments or land. And through my podcast, I talk to a lot of different architects and designers as well. And we've started to collect this group of people who look at how the environment and then how to best honour that environment and how to find the sacred spots in that environment. And we're putting together quite a discipline on this. So that's what's happening with Land Whispering. We haven't launched it yet, but it's coming soon. And the other one really is just on the podcast. It is such a joy to meet such amazing people globally that have a story, but not only just a story, it's not all designers. There's all sorts of really fantastic people that I get on there that have a story in it, but what they have is they're creative and they have a passion. And so I learned something from everybody. Callie's particular podcast, I remember going and saying to my wife, oh my God, I can't believe the stuff I just learned, all for the sake of Callie giving up his time. So tonight, this aesthetics of joy, and I'm going to kind of semi-refer to a lot of stuff that Callie said as well along the way. But this picture was one that I had taken a few years ago. It's on my website, and I always have a bit of a laugh about how high I'm jumping, because I'm not. The photographer lifted me up a little to make me a little more joyful. I did have a picture here of a dog jumping, and I went, oh, that's probably not so good. But the key point to the dog jumping is dogs live in the moment. They have no remorse for the past, really, and they don't really plan a future. They live in the moment. And joy is something that we find in the moment, and the closer we live to it, the better. So the dog is probably more applicable than myself. One of the big points about joy is that it's all about you. It's not about anybody else. It's just about you. And what I'm going to go through tonight, you'll see things you like, you'll dislike, there'll be things you agree with, things that you disagree with. That's kind of part of it. It's all the same stuff. We're all going to see the same stuff, but we'll all see what we see in that stuff. And that will be because it touches an emotion or a feeling within us when we delve into it. And the idea is to try and inspire you into what the built structure can do to bring you joy. You know, we all have this little dream of our own space. You know, if we could just have one space where everybody just left us alone, where we could be unobserved, where we could just relax, that we didn't have any feelings of judgment or any feelings of not belonging, if it was just ours. You know, for guys often it'll be like, I just want a den. I want to pull the door closed. And for women it's like, I want a whole house without all the rest of you in it. You know, it's, yeah. And a cat, you think of all the anxiety cats have gone through with COVID, with lockdown. There's people in their houses. These people came and went. Now they're here all the time. This isn't good. Yeah. There's a fabulous little quote, and I might not have it quite right, but from a guy called James Allen, and it says in a book called As a Man Thinketh, which is, no man is truly himself unless he's unobserved. And I love that little saying because it's just a really interesting thing, you know, and that's why we crave a space that's just about us. And that's why I say it's all about you. My wife would say everything's all about me in our house as well. Doesn't really matter whether you know you're a famous jewelry designer or whether you're a barber to the stars in Brooklyn. You still have these things where you need to find your own space. So it goes at all levels. And in fact, often the more recognizable people are, the more they need their own space to be able to center themselves. The other point is that it's not about a big brain, and it's more about a mindset. And when we look at the big brain and we go, oh, the brain's doing everything here, the brain isn't actually what's doing everything here. The whole body is. The brain's only part of the organ. Every cell holds the memory of past and present, and every cell reacts to what happens. And that's when wellness comes into the story of joy. If we were to, start at number one, I would call number one would be gratitude. Is being grateful for good and being grateful for the bad things that happen to us, because each part of them, we have a choice and we have a journey we can take from that gratitude. So number one would be gratitude, and gratitude always leads to happiness. So you can't be grateful without happiness. And happiness always leads to joy, and joy always leads to wellness. And, you think what Callie was saying about how you connect with spaces and they bring you joy, or you connect with emotions and they bring you joy. That's a really key thing, and that's the life's journey. So if you start with gratitude and move to happiness and move to joy and then into wellness and then back into life's journey, and it's self-fulfilling. It's like the queue outside the restaurant. It's self-fulfilling. And the reason I put at the top a great skill set, without a great mindset equals upset, is that often people have to practice to get themselves into that space. They have to create a habit. I know a lot of that doesn't have tons to do with houses, but this is where it might do. When we look at the drivers that make us feel a certain way about a space or about a structure, there is different things that we're looking for in different spaces. So in an office, we'd be looking for a different experience. In a restaurant, we'd look for a different experience. In a hospital, we'd look for a different experience. But when we come to a home, and because I deal in residential homes or residential spaces, we're always looking to how do we meet the needs of the people whose home it's going to be, and how it's positioned and where it's positioned, and if it's right on a busy street or if it's very easy to go past, then how much of a fortress do we make? So if you look at, say, mid-century modern architecture, often there's fortress fronts to mid-century modern architecture because it was open to the street. That's just my timer, so I don't talk all night. Let's start. Let's do that. Let's go dismiss. I hate that. Sorry. So what I did is I found these two pictures because both these pictures have got something in common, a lot in common when you look at the space and the shape of them. Part of this is safe and security. It's privacy. It's a journey, and I like to look at things with masculine energy and feminine energy, and that doesn't mean that all things female are feminine energy and all things male are masculine energy. It's a movement between them both, within males and females. We both have the energy. It's what's predominant in the way we behave. And if we look at the Yves Saint Laurent Museum in Morocco over there, you look at the fact that really the feminine energy in there is the softness of colour and that one big curving wall, and that how that leads you in. And it's taking you to a very, very narrow entrance. And in going to a narrow entrance, we get a bit more suspicious about where we're headed. We're wondering if we're going to be trapped or corralled. And when we look at these psychological factors to what's happening, is how we want to journey people into the space of a home or to bring them into that space of a home, and how important it is that it sets up either a transition or a journey for them. The other one is a home, and you can see it's pretty much the same set of rules, and it takes you into by curving in, but the organic path shape and all these things slow your journey down. They mean that you're careful about where you're walking. You're unsure about where your feet might go. And each time you make somebody a little bit unsure, you take a little more control of them by letting them come to you. So when they're coming to the museum, we don't want them to feel like there's any barriers to it, but we do want them to feel mystery and intrigue when they're coming in to that space. We want something to be discovered. When they're coming to our home, we want them to be behaving in the way that we would like, so then we can let them into our home. So when we're playing with these kind of things, it's about creating security for us and then joy for somebody else. One of the things that often gets missed in a home is we drive into the garage and then we go through one boring door. And I always try to go, well, how do we get you to walk into the main entrance that you built for everybody else that was going to come over and you were going to show off to? How do we get you to come in and get your own personal experience that you would only get coming through that door? What would you see? What would be the hero we would show you that unless your guest looked sideways halfway down that hallway or down that entrance, they would never get? So where's your journey of joy? Because otherwise you might as well be coming through the trades entrance or the laundry or something. You know, pick up the washing on the way or get it off the line or something. In this structure also, both of them use brick, which is quite a male, strong, bonding, square, basic structure. But when you look at how it was done in the Yves Saint Laurent Museum there, where it's actually got all those shadows and stuff, it gets texture and it comes alive. This is another big trend. I did quite a bit of talking on trends, and this is a big trend which is feminine energy. And again, it's not female, it's just feminine energy. And the way that we're shifting, and you know, Callie was saying about people storming the Capitol building. We just had 4 years of Trump as a president, and he polarized people. He polarized people's behaviors, their beliefs, and their actions. He certainly, forced a divide in things. We have global warming, which is not polarizing, it's more terrifying. It's an unknown factor. What will happen with that? And then we have the pandemic, which is, again, somewhat polarizing, but what it's done is it's asked us who we should trust and what we should question and what will the outcomes be. Everything's changing so quickly around health that we're not really sure where we will land. So this puts a certain amount of stress into us. So what we're looking for in homes and in spaces is things where we can de-stress and relax. With this rise in feminine energy, I use these two pictures basically based on the fact of the organicness of them. Because they're organic, I say they're cave-like or womb-like, and they're looking out to a brighter future or out to something that's going to take your attention. But if we look at what's happened in design, we've got a lot more curves, arches. This isn't just a cyclical thing. It's actually driven by the changes that has happened in the world as well. And they were on a cycle, so they'd turned up again since the 70s. They were turning up in that respect, but what's happened is it's gone a step further than that because of the environment that we're in globally at the moment. And we get a lot of female energy from these spaces, a lot of nurturing, safety, and a feeling of them wrapping around you. If you notice in both pictures, all of them are hard surfaces. So they're not actually that soft and nurturing. They are far more nurturing in the overall space and the dimensions of the space and the way they wrap around you. And of course, if we have something where it's cave-like and it's something that we're contained by and we feel safe and secure inside, we also need the yin and the yang. We need the opposite. We need our freedom and we need to be able to explore. And when we think about things like biophilic design and biomimicry, what we're doing is we want to be a part of nature. Callie was saying how to our detriment, we've removed ourselves from a lot of that rather than put it in. And so we need still that ability to go and explore and be in the landscape, but we also need something to come back to. Intimacy in a space, like how do we create intimacy in a space with covering, with size, with the softness, with texture? These are all things that are really important that are going to make the difference. When we have that space where it's more intimate, we get to be able to have more privacy, more security, more self-nurturing, and we want to accelerate the amount of that in a home. It also comes with things like airflow and light, whether it's filtered or harsh light, what we look out on, how things feel becomes really, really important. Bathing as a ritual so that it's something that we do for ourselves, even we really are doing it for others. We're doing it for ourselves as well, Thank goodness we do it for others, otherwise it will stink. But taking, not necessarily the time, but having the rituals and having the space and the beauty in that space to actually feel nurtured. You know, in the morning, often it's a rush, you're doing stuff, getting out of the place, but taking time, like things like steam showers, you know, items like this, or luxurious bathing, or just taking care of yourself. The same when you've got your bedroom, your bed, you know, they're getting the 8 hours of sleep, going and reviving yourself. Sleep's one of our biggest healers. It's one of the, in fact, I think they say it's number one as a healer. So when we think of that, then how do we get great uninterrupted sleep? How do we get beautiful sleep? Which again brings us back to joy, because if you get good sleep, you're on your game far more, and then you're less stressed. And then what happens is that you've got the ability to deal with so many more things that come along in life. So we look at these as really important things. So from that, I'm going to go into just sort of, each home is a story. So some of that you go, oh, God, I hate that stuff. I would never live like that. You know, we've got all our judgments that go on in there. And I go, that's perfect, because what we're doing is we're touching this or that within you to find out what it is in your journey and your story. And your story is like super important as to, when we do a home, as to, just like Callie was saying with a restaurant, how do we tell a story of the occupants of that home? And if it's a renovation, how do we keep pieces of the past that we can carry into the future that weren't our story before we owned it? So whose story is it anyway was my little game, and I thought I'd give away some wine here. Does anybody know whose home this is? I don't know whether you can see past me well enough, but does anybody know whose it is and where it is? Any guesses?
It's not mine.
It's not yours. Would you like it? I'd love to own this home, because I'd probably make an absolute fortune out of people coming and visiting it. I'll give you all a clue. It's in Cuba. It was owned by a very famous person. Hemingway. Who said Hemingway? Absolutely. That's Ernest Hemingway's home. And cheater. But one of the things that's interesting with that is, if you look at how masculine the space is, and then also like the ego and the trophies and all those kind of pieces, that it was all about him. That story's all about who he was in the tropics. I've got another one. Whose do you reckon this is? We wouldn't even send him there. No. Any clue? Any guesses? Ooh, no, but I like that. I don't know that anybody will get it. But it's interesting with all the Indian artifacts and stuff that are in there. Again, it's a very famous person. This person's an actor. Some of the things I love in there is not the white vent in the ceiling. How the hell could you do that and end up with that crappy vent in the ceiling? That just lets down the whole thing. Some clues. This person became really famous from a movie with the word kid in it. This person's a skier, maybe has their own ski field. This person's a massive movie buff and has done masses for the American movie industry. Anyone? No. Older. No, but close. Could be. No, go older. I'll give it to you. It's Robert Redford. So this is Robert Redford's place in Sundance. So the Sundance Kid. So he owns the whole ski field and that whole region around there that he made the resort in. And he's got multiple homes anyway, but just really interesting how it tells a story, maybe not of Robert Redford. It just tells a story that's local to the space, that honours the Indian culture of that space. And I think it's really beautiful the way it does that. And I've got one more, which I really love this one. Anybody know this one and anybody been there? Kaz, shut up. Any clues? Do you want a clue? Yeah? You want a clue? A singer. And he's dead. Is he in the building? Yeah, Elvis Presley. Has Elvis left the building yet? So this is in Elvis's home. Now, Elvis's home in Graceland, this is in Graceland. If you've ever been, it's a great journey, especially as a design person. When Elvis was he started working in Hawaii, and there's kind of multiple stories with this, but ultimately, in Hawaii, when it became a state, it became a big travel destination for mainland Americans. They'd been there before, like America had been for a long time, but then when it became a state, it became this tourist destination. And that has a big effect. If you go to Palm Springs, you'll see tiki hut style in Palm Springs as well. And I don't know, I was told this by a guide that I work with out in Palm Springs, but I don't know, I've never checked to see whether it's true. But actually a guy from LA invented the tiki hut style. And in him inventing the tiki hut style, it became popular in Hawaii. So it was kind of like a marketing job. Yeah, and it's one of the 5 key styles in Palm Springs. But Elvis went to Hawaii, and then he came back, and this was where he would sit with mates and jam with guitars in the house, even though he had other spaces. This was where they would do that. And it's just sort of off behind the kitchen, and you go through there, and there's this fabulous tiki hut. And on the other side, over on what side's that? The left, that was a waterfall. They can make that run as a waterfall as well. So anyway, pretty cool. And a bit of fun as to, why would he have that? Only to create joy. Only to go there to create a transition from where he was. I've got a little piece here which was just around what happens with joy. And when we're designing and the way we approach things is the first thing we look at is nature's gifts. So nature gives us light, air, and views, really. That's about what it gives us. Everything else we end up paying for in another way. Even views we pay for in our rates. So then with that, what we do is if we move to our design considerations, there's so many pieces to this puzzle that we have to look at. But if we move to our design considerations, our function, our flow, our form, our space, our scale, all those kind of things, then that will take us back to the wellness part, where we've got to look at things like the biology of a building. So how it's serving you, what the materials do. If there's VOCs, how will that work in that space? So what emotions will those things, those space and size and stuff bring up? Will they create calmness? Will they create warmth? Will they create security? Will they create pleasure? These are the ways that we sort of go. So we go from our nature's gifts over to our design consideration, and then back to how those will bring wellness. And then we look at the challenges that space might have, or the materiality of that space might have. And then from that, we move back over to our goals and the building science around how we can best do those things. Because when we get into the challenges, I even put in there the same thing that Callie had there, which was that Lombard effect of noise in a home. And if it accelerates, the whole family ends up stressed because they're all talking so loud to try and be understood. And it makes, if you've got guests over and stuff, it makes for really uncomfortable sort of spaces. Something that we do when we're designing homes, in Queensland, we're often designing pools into the structure, is we like a pool. Don't get me wrong, we love a pool. We love a pool because it helps us cool the house naturally. We can use that air that comes off the pool, gives us a big, big water feature, and it gives us somewhere that we can go and take time out in or play in as well, and cool off in. But also, if you've got kids, it's a real space of noise. There's a ton of noise that happens in a pool. And what we might do with a roof shape around a pool will be to get that noise away from the home, or to keep that noise out of just travelling into the home and ricocheting around all those hard surfaces that are out there. I'm not going to go too much more into that. There is a lot that we can do in this, and when we get into building biology, I don't actually do that myself. I work with a lady called Zara Dakota who has a company called The Healthy Home, and she's really good at like breaking it down into what the materiality is and what it will do for you, whether you've got allergies or whether it will increase your wellness or whether it will take your wellness away from you, just out of the materiality of a building. I've put together a little bit here on basically biomimicry and on biophilic design, and I call it at one with nurture. And the reason I call it at one with nurture is because it could be nature, but it is really nurture. Because what happens when we work in this space with biophilia, especially, like look in here. This is what it is. It's planting, it's having nature up and close and personal to us. It's the movement of nature and the way that we interact with it. This brings wellness. If you look at the studies on it, and I haven't got any hard fact studies here, although if you just Google it, you'll see a whole heap of it. One of the things that happens with that is we get a massive amount of healing from being in nature. And it accelerates if we can see it move or if we can hear it. So bird song, things like that, and movement and shadows. And we can mimic it and we still get results from it, even if it's only mimicked. But better than mimicking it is actually delivering it. And when you look in these pictures here, you know, you've got like the organic shape of the table, you've got the security of the wall behind you, you've got the green wall beside you, but you've got the light peeping over the top that creates some mystery. These are all, that's all biophilic design and how we wrap it around you and make it feel like you're part of the outdoors when you're probably indoors. The other is more biomimicry, which is where we use the patterns of nature and also pieces of nature. Now, this is a really blatant example. Any of you that come from up in the Sunshine Coast or have been up in the Sunshine Coast area, if you just slightly north of Noosa is Tewantin, and this is the shell house in Tewantin. It's known as the shell house, and it's got this shell that you walk through to go in and you walk out to come out of it. And if you think about your transition then to the world when you go in the door or out of the door, you actually go through this shell, which mentally has to change your state. So you come home, you open the door, you go through the shell. You've got to make a conscious decision as you go through. So it's a great way of transitioning into another space and knowing that you're home. So things like this can be really fun to draw in and to design into spaces. I wanted to put something in because I said we love pools. And again, it was something here. So often a pool's just a big water feature that costs you a lot of money to keep clean and, you know, put chemicals in every week or whatever it is. But then having something where it's still part of that bathing and being back in touch with nature. We see a lot of these small pools, like the little round holes. And then I found this other picture of the one where it's like sitting with the rocks and the holes that you go in and obviously swim underneath and into different spaces. This looks like partly terrifying and partly intriguing. I called it holy water because it was like this thing, but it will deliver so much to you as a human being in that space. And being able to look down into it even. And again, I looked at this one, I went, wow, is that masculine or feminine energy? And I kind of put it in the feminine energy part, but the masculine part is the exploration in it. There's something really special about being able to bathe, essentially. If you think of that's where it came from in our primal back DNA, is that it was bathing and it was a source of water to drink. It was something that's life-sustaining, and it's one of the elements that we have to deal with. When I say that, don't have to deal with it, it's one of the elements that makes up our being is water. So we have a very big connection to it. I have a thing about transitioning in spaces. How do we take you from one space to another? You know, when we draw a house, on acreage, we always look like the driveway starts here. There's a point when we can start to influence what's going to happen next. And how will we bring you through that journey? You know, you think of the old tree-lined pieces and all those kind of things, and they spark up imagination, and in them sparking up imagination, they bring you alive, they settle you, they make it about you. Whether it's that or whether it's open and vistas or grasses or whatever, there be the story that works for you. But the same happens when we're in an urban space, like an urban jungle, is how do we transition from the world here to the world there, which is when we can put joy and aesthetic that's just about you. In this particular one, lots of plants, it's going into your own jungle. If you notice the structure of the plants, they're all soft. They're all larger leaves. There's nothing that repels you. If you notice the stairs that you go up, the stairs are like taking you on a journey. They're transitioning you not at an equal pace, but at an unequal pace. And then as you go under the canopy, you get the feeling of intimacy and security. As you come out of that, there's light out on the other side of it that lets you free again, so that becomes your own vista within your property. These are the kind of games we play as designers to make the journey for you. But we've got to discover you to make the journey, and you've got to know yourself well enough. So there's a lot of this kind of gentle swaying backwards and forwards till we find the pieces that make it a journey that works for both. I love this home. It's in Australia. I didn't do it. I would have loved to have. I wouldn't think that well, I don't think. But it's beautiful because it's the strength of the structure, such masculine energy. It's like a block, it's square, it's solid. But then we've got the cave opening, and then the cave opening's also like a lantern, and it shines light out, so it's welcoming. It's saying it's okay to be here, but we do have this security. If we look at the pathway that leads into it, the pathway that leads into the structure is like, it's organic, the grass is growing into it on the sides, yet we're going to a big square concrete box, but we're going to do it by wandering through. This is more of a discovery journey, so it puts some mystery. The fact that the whole thing's cantilevered, looks like it's cantilevered off the ground, tells us a lie, and it makes us interested again in why we would get there. And that's when you look at design and you go, there's really two simple elements in that thing. There's a curve and there's a box. And yet the whole thing's alive, and there's so much intrigue and mystery, and that it's got a tactility about it that you want to experience. And that's when we start to get excited, and it can bring, for some of us, joy. For others of us, we go, oh my God, I don't want to be anywhere near that. So when we're looking, we're trying to challenge people as to what will create their joy. In this one on that side, the left, I put biomimicry, because I look at this one and I go, there's actually like a creek bed that's running to the front door. It's like it's running you down there. It's all broken stones, even though it's flagstone floor. It's more than a design element. It's a story that takes us down there. On one side, we've got a bank, and on the other side of it, we've got a bunch of plants. That's like the side of the creek. And we've got the canopy of the trees over the top of us, and then we've got the light allowed through. If we imagine this as being that picture as opposed to it's in a home, then we start to be able to guide people through a story that might mean something to them, or give them a journey that changes their psychology as they go towards the front door. The one on the left, was that right? No, that was the one on the right, sorry. I'm not very good with those. This place just intrigues me because it's ritualistic, and somebody did this so deliberately. The fact that the light and the sun can come through the top of it, the fact that that's a fountain, or it's a thing of water in the middle, that you sit or you're seated around in a circle. This is all very ritualistic in its behaviour. It's not for eating, unless it's shared plates or they're catching fish in the pond. And yet it's got that womb shape, but it looks out into nature as well. It excludes nature inside, but it takes you back into the cave. So it creates a sense of tranquility and safety, but it's just got a beautiful form to it that allows us to be in that space. And when I say the be, like the dog jumping. I decided I'd play a little bit with colour, so I only used one colour, and I just thought I'd use it because we might not all like yellow, but if you saw on Callie's slide there also, The yellow was like that, really close to happiness and joy, and often yellow is used as the colour of joy. And I thought, let's just play with a couple of yellow interiors, because yellow is quite a harsh colour to use. It can be quite hard to use, and it can be quite overwhelming when you use it. In these spaces, it's blended beautifully, almost into a monochromatic environment, you know, where it's got softness, and where we've got concrete floors and flagstones, and we've got walls that are plastered in like natural render or natural sand cement. That tells a story of outside and inside. We've got light voids that come through. They're both, whereas if I said to you, oh, we're going to do your house in yellow, you might freak out. I'll show you one that you could freak out about in a minute. In there, it all feels okay. It all feels like that you're on a nice journey of comfort, and on a journey, the scale and the size and the way things are positioned is really beautifully done. This is the one that might freak you out a bit. This is joyful. But here we've got really hard contrasts, and so it's drama. It creates tension. Whereas in the previous one, there isn't much tension. It's all flow. And this one here, it creates tension. It demands to be seen. And for a lot of people, this would bring no joy. So when we use a colour and we go, oh, it's the colour of joy, you go, really? I don't know. But I love to just push the story to find out where people land. This one here I chucked in, it's Falling Water. I do tours at Falling Water. I don't do the tour, I just use other people to do the tour, but take tours to Falling Water. It's a really fantastic building. It's something very special. With that, it's total biomimicry of the site. The whole place is stacked out of the stone from the site. It is made to fit totally within the environment, and as if it's a part of the environment an awful lot. So again, if you haven't been, or look it up online, it's just, there's a journey through every room in this place and every space in the home that is just incredible, that will take you on a journey for your senses. Some of it you'll love, some of it you won't. And lastly, I wanted to go back to two things. One was fire gazing, because I didn't talk about that, and fire's another element that we're very linked to, because we see it as warmth and stuff. And has anybody heard of candle gazing? So there's a thing called candle gazing. Candle gazing is about when you don't want to light a fire in the living room, so you can just light a candle. But it takes you into a meditative state. It takes you into a place of calm, and it takes you into a place of, often people connect with storytelling, with groups of people, but also their own very personal experiences. So I think it's a really interesting thing when you look at something like fire gazing, and that you can just bring it down to an element of candle gazing. And if you want to get away into your own space, these are ways that you can sort of close off the world very easily. My last one is rituals, and we often need rituals to keep us on track. Now, why anybody would do that to themselves, I've got no idea. To me, it just looks like frightening. And an awful lot of discipline. I'm way too lazy and want a whole lot easier results than that. The actual environment doesn't really deliver an awful lot, but for somebody to go through what it takes to do that and to be in that space, this would be their story and their journey. It's not everybody's. And it's really fascinating when you see something like this that's very deliberately designed to do it in a very deliberate way. So with that, I'd like to thank you all. Thank you.
Pop another chair up for you. Do you enjoy that? Yeah, so Callie asked me earlier how I met Adrian. I was living in Noosa at the time. I'm two things by trade. I'm a human behavioural analyst and an interior designer. And for those of you who are from Noosa, I'm looking at one particular person right now. It's a beautiful place, but it can be a little bit vanilla. And I met Adrian and went, oh, there's more than vanilla in Noosa, thank you. It was an absolute pleasure to meet Adrian, because I felt as though I'd met one of my tribe, because we speak the same language. So thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure to rescue me from Noosa, although aesthetically it was beautiful, but so lovely to be stimulated, right? And to be challenged in thought-provoking ways. And Callie, I met at another event not too far from here, and we immediately spoke the same language, talking about human behavioural analytics and spatial psychology. And it's a pleasure to have both of them, obviously, with us in the Caroma Temple to speak to the same. Having said that, we have done our time. We have got open time for questions and answers, but Callie and Adrian are coming back for the Sustainability Expo, and we'll do a masterclass on the back of that. So if you found it of interest this evening, please register your expression of interest with myself, and they will unpack versions of that for yourself to be involved upstairs in the Clark room. And also, I have emailed you with both of their contact details. Adrian said to me this evening, Deb, what you do really well is connect people. And the reality is, for me, for you, this is only an introduction. It's my opportunity to introduce these two wonderful people into your worlds and respective worlds, to open other conversations of design, of architecture, of teaching, of events. So not the end, but certainly the very beginning of potentially relationships and business that you might do collectively and collaboratively. Having said that, thank you so much for that. That was awesome. You did so good. We like you. You can come back.
Thanks, Deb. We'll be back.
And may I open for questions and answers?
Callie's got the answers.
Please.
Number 4, and is it working?
You there?
When I go into a hospitality space,
Yep.
which table do you sit at? Is there anything about the way you address the layout that you go, well, that's the best seat, or do you try to make it even and every seat is a great seat? What's the theory on that? And does it vary between locations?
Before you answer, is there a restaurant you have in mind? And we'll find out whether Callie, where he sits in that restaurant.
It's every place I go with my partner. She has I want to sit over there. And
Yeah, so it's interesting. So it's difficult to get all restaurant seats to be equally desirable. It's almost impossible. But I remember doing a restaurant here in Barangaroo, and there was a specific table in the front which needed to get there. It was just the most unpleasant table, but my client made me sit there on the opening night. I knew it was not a great table. And so there's a couple of things. First of all, tables need to be, so there's a lot of rules around this, and there's, as I said, some to be broken, but tables 3 deep are always the best. It kind of creates a sense of inclusion. You kind of feel like you're part of the people around you. If they're 1 deep or 2 deep, you feel conspicuous. 3 deep works. A seat with your back against the wall is always the most desirable. You feel more secure, more kind of covered. And if seats are in a high traffic zone, it's the least desirable. It's just too much energy going past you. So there are many things to look at. Table, the way the thing is lit, but we try specifically always to light the table, not the people, so the light bounces on the table and shines back up. But I would say that by and large, it's the depth of the table, not the depth of the table, the depth of the mounted tables, the fact that how you sit within the space, how you face. People like to face the entrance, not with their back to the entrance, but somebody needs to have their back to the entrance. But you'll find always, it's never the table at the front that people want to sit at the most. They want to sit further in, never completely at the back, almost kind of halfway in, because that's surrounded by the most amount of people. There are many more things, but I mean, those are the kind of very basics.
Does that help?
So, Callie, if we were going to a restaurant and it was something where you didn't really want to have to spend much time, so you weren't going so much for a pleasurable social experience, more a duty one.
Don't come to one of ours.
I was going to say maybe, well, maybe your mother-in-law is paying, so you'll take her. You'd sit in a busy walkway aisle space so you didn't have to stay too long and she wouldn't realise that's what you'd done?
So, the busier, the more energy within the space, the shorter the visit. It needs to be relaxed. So it needs to be. So where we have seats that are within a high traffic zone, we try and do bench seating that kind of curves around and keeps you away from it, not just tables. My guys at the back, they can also feel free to answer any of this because you're as experienced with a lot of these things as I am. So it's normally the one at the very front, the closest to the point of sale, is the least desirable. So that's where you want to sit your mother-in-law, yeah.
Yeah.
What do you do a revolving restaurant?
There are quite a few of this, with views.
Would it not also come down to temperament? I mean, again, as a human behavioural analyst, there's goal setter, lifestyle, information and stability. Goal setter always look for the powerful table to sit at. Lifestyle has to be fun and buoyant and colourful and movement. Information is the detail person who wants to be alone, happy to sit at the small table in the corner. And then the stability, it needs to be easygoing. So, again, it's aesthetics, but it also comes down to temperament.
So you need a psych test to choose the table.
Yeah, that comes with the COVID test. You put you scan your psych test at the same time.
And it goes, oh, you are a...
That's exactly
no, you
right.
can't stay with your partner. You're a...
Next question. Sorry, that didn't answer your question, but we'll get to it. Come to the workshop.
Hi. I am really interested in the balance or the diversity in the human sensory processing, so sensory seeking versus sensory avoidance in particular. And I think occupational therapists talk a lot about the sensory diet of being able to choose your stimulation. So in hospitality, like reading from the spaces that you guys create, there's a lot of sensory seeking, there's a lot of colour, texture, vibrancy. Do you think that there's levels of cultural aspect in that, or do you think it's because hospitality is an entertainment-related space, therefore it's naturally more successful if it's sensory seeking?
I don't know if I'm going to answer this correctly, so to help me if I'm not, but we've done restaurants all over the world, and we found that the same rules really apply. People are drawn to exactly the same kind of things, spaces, same kind of proportion, same sense of volume, same sense of, by and large, colour, although like places with colder weather, it's more muted, always, somehow. So we've done some Nando's, for example, and they're very colourful, but they kind of push that all over the world. But by and large, the volume, the proportion, the texture, the way it's lit, that's universal.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to talk about it, but also I sort of relate it to the introvert that's sometimes extrovert. So it's like I can be social for a short term and like I can really enjoy the hospitality space, but then I need to completely sort of go to a very quiet, still place after.
Look, so I mean, there are, so when we lay out restaurant space, we are aware that there are the more sociable and the less sociable kind of space, the more kind of, we always try and find spaces where we have private, complete private, because sometimes it's just a function, or you want to be, or you specifically book for that because of a need or a celebration. But the spaces are never all the same, but I would say 70% of them are similar in the execution, and then we find the more, and some people are more extroverted, so within the restaurant space you need to find spaces that are more kind of exposed, not too much. Some are they're the least desirable, and then there's a kind of happy space in between where you definitely, because deep down inside, I mean, I'm quite introverted and he's quite extroverted. I mean, that's obvious in our presentation. We somehow, people, whether introverted or extroverted, having attention is okay. You know, we all like a bit of attention. We all thrive on a bit of attention.
Some more than others.
I think as an extrovert, you're not always also looking for attention. You know you can have it when you want it. You know? Introverts always worry that they're never going to get it.
I think we need to have a judge in the middle of these two to call this fist fight off. Any other questions?
Yeah, you talked about the queue at a restaurant.
Meal.
Well, yeah, you. Sorry.
Yeah, I told
Callie,
you I don't want
sorry.
more questions.
Queue at a restaurant. There's a new restaurant opened up in Newtown, and when I go out to eat, I want food on my plate. I'm sick of these little tiny bits. I want to eat. So, it's like, oh, I'm not lining up at a queue. I'm going to this one that's empty. They're new, and it's husband and wife. They're Egyptian. Little baby runs around. Mum's in the kitchen. The food is amazing. It's seriously cheap. And their walls are just brick. And there's nothing. And I was like, oh, I love this. But I've been away, and I came back, and I'm going there to eat. And they had hung this thing on the wall. And it just, to me, I was... how do you say, insulted. And I kind of wanted to ask her to take it off, but it was for the child or something, I don't know. But I said, oh, please don't put any more things on the wall, because it really looks good bare. But it's going back to your talking about family, and, they know my name now, and we say hello, and they give me big discounts on a $10 spaghetti. It's so cheap, and the food is so good. So that's a thing for them. Anyway.
So what's the question? Do you want Callie to go and tell them to take the picture off the wall?
There's no question there, is there?
There's no question. I guess what makes one person feel comfortable in a space, and how do you accommodate yourself if you don't feel comfortable in the space if it's altered? And how do you determine what you're attracted to and what you want to sit in and reside in? And how do we understand that about ourselves?
Look, I mean, for public spaces like we do, so Adrian, I mean, he's more specific in specific personality, so that's a different story. So for us, it's like kind of 80-20. We need to respond to 80% of the way people behave. So there'll be the breaking of the rules in that kind of space, but we don't account for that. So we need the most amount of people for the longest amount of time and repeat kind of visits. So we won't really look at things that break those kind of rules where you're not happy to stand in a queue. You kind of go for a specific personality because, I mean, there's a little Indian restaurant just down the road from our home as well. And I go there with my wife, my daughter, plenty times. And we are, I think it can seat 40 and we're never more than like 5, 6, 7 people in the space. But it's close to home, it's on the way to the beach, it's great food, it's a really bad interior, and I can understand why. But, we like it for our own personal reasons, but it's not what we designed for.
Wonderful. Any more questions? Please, Matilda. Matilda's one of our interior architects on site.
Hello. You spoke a lot about, obviously, creating joy through design. I'm wondering, have you ever tried to design something to create something else or to spur on another type of behaviour or action outside of making people feel good?
Yep.
And what was it?
Quite often with the entry to a home, we won't necessarily create joy because the occupant of the home doesn't enter through the main entrance. So we will often, I alluded to it before, of taking control of people. So taking control, depends how the house is positioned and where it's positioned and what environment it's in. But in an urban position, quite often what we want to do is we want to give people cues as to where to go. It was like Callie was saying, you go into a place, you want to know where the toilets are. You don't really want to have to ask. You want it to be obvious. What we do is we gently funnel people from wide to narrow, and we will, depending on what they can see, how private the home is from the outside. So how if it's very private from the outside, so you can't really get a view into anything, then we can give people quite an easy journey up there. What we're trying to do is when it's got some issues with privacy where people can see into spaces, we want to make them slow down and consider where they are. So we would often break up pathways So, or we would put stairs in, and we would do things like, if you're in a place where you'd have a lot of door knocking, we would make the distance between the front door and the step up onto what we'd call the porch. We would make that short, so it's very uncomfortable to stand too close to the door, and it's very uncomfortable to stand too far back. And in that point there, when somebody knocks on your door, you have a sense of they are not in comfort. Yeah? The other thing is which way we swing the door as to whether we're opening that room to them or whether we're opening them to go round you. So if predominantly the person whose home it's going to be has a high level of need for privacy, we would always, or a high want for privacy, we would always make them the barrier to being invited in, as opposed to if I swing the door open like this and you can see through into the living room and on to the view, people have a feeling that they're welcome. We might want to contain them at a certain point. We might want to make them feel welcome like that, but then we'll put a barrier to stop them. So we're often putting those things in place, and they're not to the detriment of the owner, but they are to control the visitor. So it's a big psychological kind of gentle, empathetic type of jigsaw puzzle, but it's very, very decided. And it's very deliberate.
It's gentle because it's you, Adrian. Others aren't quite so gentle. I have somebody in the room who lives near the airport, and she will remain nameless but is sitting this way, often has people deciding to drop in and stay for a month.
Yeah.
So we need to recreate the porch.
Yeah. Well, with that, you would be very, very deliberate about you being able to see people rather than them see you, whether you'd be able to tell whether somebody's necessarily home or not home. We'd be more a fortress front on a property, and then we would make it sort of uncomfortable if you were trying to get there with a case. Dangerous, maybe.
Quickly add to that for perspective. So it's not all, depending on the user case. So when you design, so we've done a lot of drive-thrus and quick service restaurants and so forth. So you design for something completely different. So for example, in a drive-thru, it's not, what you want to do is fool the visitor in the car. So you design, the reason the drive-thru drive is shaped in a certain way, it may seem like it's just shaped for the site, it's not. It's so that you don't see more than 5 cars ahead of you. Because if you see more than 5 cars ahead of you, the queue's too long and you want to get out of it. Same so we just got awarded through a client that we do a lot of work for, Seagrass, the Five Guys brand. So it's not our design, we execute it. But what they do there is, because you're waiting in a queue, you are in a queue and you're always going to be in a queue, but what they have is to sell the story of their peanut butter oil that they fry stuff in. They have peanuts in the front that you break and you eat and you just kind of, it's part of the thing. But it keeps you busy, so you stay in the queue a little bit longer. You don't mind being in the queue. So it depends on what you design for, to be aware of that behavior. And sometimes it's just to fool or keep somebody busy, or not to tell the full story ahead of time. Otherwise, yeah.
Do you know where the fact that many lifts are mirrored comes from? So this I worked as an innovation trainer for a few years with companies like Airbus and stuff like that. So did a lot of backstories on innovation, and in the lower part of downtown New York, and the buildings had these old lifts, and you still get them down in those old parts of town. They had these old lifts that were like cages. And the cost of refitting all these buildings is just astronomical. The only reason when it became a problem was when uptown, they built high-speed lifts in high-rises. They actually had a high-speed lift. And people were like, I have to wait. And so these buildings had no people to come to them anymore. They all moved uptown and all the landlords were dying down there. And somebody came up with this idea that if you mirrored the foyer, people like to observe other people. And so if you can see somebody else, what they're doing and how they're behaving without directly looking at them, but spot them in a mirror, people were happy to wait. And that was a massive innovation that saved tons of landlords and stuff. And that's, to this day, that's still often used in these spaces because people like, in public spaces, like to be able to observe other people. So, you know, like in
And
that
also
queue.
yourself.
Yeah, and yourself, yeah. Yeah. People like to check themselves out, but not be caught doing it, you know.
Yeah, there's this rule, people are drawn to people, and then they're drawn to things. Always people first, then things.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Last question. Any questions? Vanessa, please.
Do I need one?
You don't? You've got a loud enough voice. Far away. This is our training and learning person for the company who's actually an exceptional person who obviously offers an awful lot of training and learning to a larger staff, but has the most inquiring mind on the planet. So please, go.
Thank you, Deb. Thank you for a very insightful presentation and great question, Matilda. In the last year, there's been a lot of educating from home, so parents having children at home. What have you seen around designing, spaces of joy, but really where it engages them in terms of learning?
Wow. I don't know anybody that I've met who homeschooled their kids that said they had a space of joy. I seriously, I know a lot of guys that have demanded a new room or a room totally be repurposed so they can concentrate on their work. I know of people who have been really grateful for the fact that the connection they've had with their kids that they wouldn't have had otherwise. But I don't know anybody who hasn't found it stressful and extremely stressful, from technology right through to the behaviour of kids. We have had clients that we've designed for since the lockdown with new builds who are going, we've got kids who are 6, 7, we know we're going to have them in this home for 10 or more years. They're multi-million-dollar homes, and they're saying, we need to design space for this because we believe that even though part of it will pass, the environment's changed. And the fact that we can learn so much online, it accelerated it. It was already in the pipeline, but it accelerated it. And they have asked for spaces that are like almost open office kind of bench type spaces in family room areas. And those can double from being craft type spaces, and they can be often closed, but they can be like craft spaces where you can have, glue and glitter and rainbows and unicorns and, whatever it is on one side of it, model making and all that, but then also computer stations, but within a zone close enough that you can be in the kitchen trying to make something, or be in that space without other distraction. That's probably the biggest thing, and it's actually revitalised, I think, the media room, because people have gone, I can't have that and that in the same space because it's a battle I'm not prepared to fight. So build us another room that becomes that media TV room, and they're taking more of that out of their family room, and they might leave it just in the living and in a specific room. And so that's mainly the difference that I've seen. We've only had a couple of lashings of it, but I bet you if you ask somebody in England or in France or in Italy, they would have a heap of stuff they could teach us because they've been through hell compared to what we have.
Great, thank you.
Beautiful. Well, that wraps up our evening this evening. As I mentioned, it's not an end to the evening. It's obviously an opportunity for you to get up close and personal with Callie and Adrian and ask some questions directly. There's plenty of cheese. There's plenty of alcohol. But speaking of which, I have got a gift for the gentlemen. I'm talking to Matilda and she's looking at me like I'm an alien. We do have a gift for them this evening. I did ask the gentlemen what their tipple of choice was, and we had gin from Adrian and bubbles for Callie. So Callie and Adrian, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, guys.
An absolute pleasure to have you in the Caroma Temple. We're not going anywhere. Please join us for another glass of wine. And don't forget, I will be sending a thank you tomorrow. If you have information you'd like to get from either gentleman, their emails will be in that email. Please feel free to reach out with subsequent follow-up. And also, Darren Palmer in a fortnight's time. And watch this space for the masterclass, which is coming up at the Sustainability Expo in a few weeks' time. Thank you so much. That's it.